10 years after the millionaire's wife is abandoned, he finds her at the airport with a younger man who resembles him attempts to approach them at the airport in Chicago. Full of activity that Friday morning, 45-year-old Andrew Thompson, a prosperous businessman with a leather handbag and a fine suit, rushed toward his boarding gate. He kept checking his gold watch in his briefcase, thinking it was another business trip. Andrew sighed, feeling empty despite his achievement because all the money in. Suddenly, something attracted his attention that the world couldn't contain, that a brown-haired woman passed him while holding the hand of a 10-year-old youngster. Agape. Old Andrew stopped talking because the woman's face was too, he whispered. Familiar Sarah. But it wasn't only the sight of the boy next to Sarah, who startled him, was staring at a mirror of the same wild blonde hair, the same green eyes, and even his gait, where a flashback struck Andrew, who was just like him as a child. Punch. In the stomach when he caught a glimpse of himself slinking out of the apartment he shared 10 years prior, Sarah's face sleeping soundly. With just a chilly note left on the kitchen table, Andrew touched his legs without realizing that her life was going to fall apart. Could it be that he was afraid it was Sarah? He was overcome with heavy guilt because he had left behind not just his wife, but also Andrew started to move in the direction of a son he didn't even know existed. He needed to talk to Sarah and the boy because his heart was pounding, explain in order to comprehend what was going on. But the airport crowd, Andrew found himself pushing people desperately as he closed the distance between them. He shouted in an attempt to get through to Sarah and the boy, but his voice was muffled by the when he eventually managed to break through the airport's cacophony. Sarah and the youngster had Andrew searched desperately for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Flight attendant saw his disturbed demeanor and inquired, "Are you okay, sir?" When his phone rang, State Andrew almost heard her. It was Vanessa, his present wife. Ignoring the call, I continued to scan the area for Sarah and the youngster. "Your aircraft is leaving." Andrew was forced by the flight attendant to stare at her, then at the boarding gate, and finally back at the he made a choice that would alter his life at that very moment in the airport lobby. "Forever," he said. "I'm not boarding." Distracted, the flight attendant appeared shocked. But Andrew had already started to move. He was adamant that he couldn't simply walk away now. Andrew hailed a cab as he left the airport because he had to know the truth. As the cab entered Chicago, he told the driver that his thoughts were racing downtown due to traffic. Andrew took out his phone and ignored Vanessa's missed calls. He called a former acquaintance who works as a private investigator as soon as his friend remarked, "I need your help." "Finding someone," Frank said. It was Andrew, responded as he provided Frank with the information he could recall about Sarah. Andrew being unable to put the boy's son out of your mind. Did he have son remorse, curiosity, and an unidentified terror mixed together in his chest? Andrew was aware that a significant event was about to occur in his life, and for the first time for a long time, success and money seemed completely irrelevant. What was important today was trying to right the horrible mistake he made while discovering Sarah, and that lad had committed 10 years prior when Andrew was in the taxi driving through the streets of Chicago, lost in the past. His thoughts returned to a night in a New York hotel bar 10 years ago. Disappointed after yet another day of work, Andrew was there on business, attempting to seal a big transaction. After ineffective meetings, he went to the bar and got a drink, which is when Vanessa showed up. Gorgeous, self-assured, and smiling, she inquired, promising an adventure-filled, challenging day. Vanessa, an executive at a company, was next to him when that chat altered everything. She talked about money and power in a big company with lots of contacts and ambition in a manner that made Andrew feel insignificant, yet inspired him to strive for greater in the months that followed. Made justifications for more business travels. After every meeting with Vanessa, he became more dependent on her company and her assurances of a prosperous and opulent life. Vanessa would argue that with the proper people in your life, you deserve more. Might be a millionaire. Andrew saw that he was contrasting his modest existence with Sarah. With Vanessa provided Sarah with a committed instructor and a glamorous lifestyle. Sarah, why do you need more? His devoted wife didn't seem to comprehend his ambitions, asked if we weren't content with our current situation. But Andrew wanted the fight within of him intensified with each. He once loved Sarah, but his need for money and prestige overcame him. Vanessa symbolized everything he believed he desired on a cold autumn evening. Success, power, and recognition. Andrew waited for Sarah to fall, making a choice that would permanently alter the lives of many. Dozing off, I packed a bag and composed a short, chilly letter. "Sarah, I can't go on like this much longer. I need more from life than you can provide. Please don't look for me, Andrew, who is grieving yet oblivious to aspiration. Andrew walked out of the apartment, tears in his eyes gone, refused to let his eyes burn as he made his way to the airport in search of a new life with Vanessa. Andrew was unaware that Sarah would just a few days later. She was distraught to find out she was pregnant alone, and she sobbed for hours while holding the pregnancy test. Uncertain of how to handle the future without Andrew in the taxi in the prison Chicago, Andrew was crushed by his previous deeds. How could he have been so selfish and oblivious? "We're here, sir." The cabbie's Andrew was pulled back to reality by a voice and discovered that he was standing in front of his friend Detective Franks. He paid the fare and left the office with trembling hands. Andrew whispered to himself, "I need to find them, taxi." Immediately, Andrew spilled the entire contents of Frank's desk office, tale of the encounter at the airport, his concerns, and his intense curiosity. Andrew, Frank questioned, "The truth, do you realize what you're doing?" "I'm worried that this might completely alter your life," Andrew answered, stroking his hair. "But I have to realize that I have to put this right." Frank sighed, "But I started making notes. I'll need additional information regarding Sarah. Last spoke about her employment. Anything that could help us." Andrew closed his eyes and tried to recall every recollection he had of Sarah. She started out as a teacher at an elementary school, which made him feel guilty. According to Andrew's research, our apartment was in the city's north. Vanessa insisted that he ignore her despite his phone ringing constantly. Frank mentioned that I would need a few days to gather, so this will take some time. Specific details. Andrew nodded, feeling agitated and angry, takes money without protesting and departs from Frank's office. Andrew became disoriented in the heart of Chicago. A place that used to seem like home appeared alien and antagonistic. He was wealthy, successful, and everything. Although he had always desired it, he would do anything to go back in time and making the correct decision despite the uncertainty of the future and the burden of the past. Andrew set out to make up for the greatest error of his life. His primary goal became to find Sarah and the child, which he hoped wouldn't. In the days that followed, Andrew remained at a motel in Chicago. But it was too late. He was so anxious to hear from Frank that he hardly slept. Plagued by while everything was going on, Sarah woke up across the city and thought about the youngster who might be his SON's usual. Waking up early, the small cottage she called home was silent, save for the gentle sound of Ethan Beckfast is watching cartoons from the living room. Sarah summoned a 10-year-old child with tangled hair as she put pancakes on the table. Sarah's blonde hair scurried into the kitchen, causing her to get messed up. Her smile briefly wavered as she realized once more how much Ethan's son's hair. As Ethan ate Sarah, he lost himself in recollections and looked like Andrew, being pregnant and struggling alone. The first several years after Andrew's departure were a nightmare. Her stomach swelled. She thought about Sarah in order to continue teaching. 8 months pregnant and sobbing while sitting on the bathroom floor with unpaid bills all around her. Sarah shook her head in the present because she was so afraid of the future, ignoring the unpleasant memories. "We succeeded, didn't we, honey?" whispered to Ethan, who was too preoccupied with his pancakes to realize that it was Mark when the doorbell rang. Sarah's 2-year boyfriend was a good-hearted man with a natural smile, and Mark remarked, "Good morning, my loves," as he entered and kissed Sarah. Sarah was overcome with appreciation as Ethan gave her a hug, saying that Mark had been a blessing in their lives, treating Ethan like a son. And across town, Andrew was given the Frank's initial understanding is that she still resides in the same Andrew Frank called a little Maple Street home in the neighborhood. After a long time, Andrew's heart raced so close, and the boy, he asked fearfully, "She does have a 10-year-old kid named Ethan?" According to what I could uncover, Sarah, the old one, attends the local school, had raised him alone since infancy. Thus the remarks came as a shock to Andrew Punch. It was true that he had a son who grew up, but whom he had never met. In addition to being fatherless, Frank and Sarah have been dating for 2 years. According to what I understand, a man named Mark is heavily involved in their. Suddenly, Andrew experienced a startling feeling of envy. What was he doing wrong? Must be envious when living in her mansion in the wealthy Chicago suburbs. Vanessa, angry that Andrew hadn't returned her calls, she paced back and forth after missing the crucial flight for a few days. He was now totally absent. She whispered to herself that something was amiss, her mind plotting possibilities. At Sarah's house, Mark assisted Ethan with his morning routine. "Remember that we have dinner while Sarah makes the boys' lunch." Sarah nodded when Mark gently reminded her tonight while I was with my parents, grinning, but since seeing it, she had been experiencing an unexplainable unrest inside. She couldn't get rid of the idea that something was about to happen because of the man at the airport who looked too much like Andrew. Shift as Andrew drove slowly along Maple Street. He sensed the likewise when he saw Frank's small home. His heart almost stopped. He parked across the street and described a bike leaning against the porch and a swing in the front yard, observing what he would say and how he would describe his how would he go about pleading for forgiveness for missing 10 years of school at that very moment. Opened, Sarah emerged as stunning as ever, followed by a man named Andrew and Ethan, presumed to be Mark. They chuckled as a joyful family headed to Andrew collapsed in the car seat at school. His emotions overtaking him. Shame, regret, fear, jealousy, but also a developing tenacity. He had to somehow participate in that life and fulfill his what had been shattered so long ago needed to be repaired, son. But how could he achieve that without ruining the joy that Sarah and Ethan appeared to have? Experienced in the days after Andrew, he parked his automobile a few houses down Maple Street since he couldn't avoid it. Every moment he saw of Ethan while observing Sarah's family's routine warmed his heart. On a bright afternoon, Andrew found the strength to leave he pretended to be casual as he strolled on the opposite path. When Sarah stepped when they went to water her plants, their gaze locked with the water. Water spilled from Sarah's hands and spread across the floor. Whispering to Andrew before he could respond, Sarah crossed the street with her eyes sparkling in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" she questioned angrily. Andrew stammered as he said, "I saw you at I needed to go to the airport with Ethan." "Don't you dare say his Sarah's name," interrupted. "You're not correct." Curious neighbors, drawn by the ruckus, started looking through their windows to see if Sarah could please Andrew. Sarah closed her eyes and begged, "I know I messed up, but Ethan is my son, isn't he?" Inhaling deeply, she discovered that they were full of unshed. She finally said, "Ethan is your boyfriend." With tears in her eyes, Andrew felt the phrase smack him. "Son, the son you left behind before you even knew he existed." "Didn't realize," he whispered. "If I had been aware of what," Sarah replied. "Don't lie to yourself, you would have stayed." Andrew stepped forward. "And let me meet you after you made your decision 10 years ago, that I know I don't deserve it, but oh please, please, him." Sarah almost yelled, "You're right, you don't. I won't allow you to ruin Ethan's joyful life and his family's affection for him." Just then, a car arrived, and Mark got out. Seeming perplexed by the Sarah became agitated with the well-dressed stranger. "Is everything well, love?" Mark inquired as Andrew put a protective arm over Sarah and experienced a surge of unreasonable. Sarah was jealous that the man was enjoying the life that was rightfully his, answering without averting her gaze from Andrew. He simply left Mark staring from one to the "Do you two know one another?" before Sarah could respond to a school question. Other people are feeling tense. When the bus halted at the corner, Ethan got out and started to walk in their direction. Panic struck. Without thinking, Sarah Andrew left now, hiding behind her as he watched Ethan get closer. His heart raced because the youngster looked exactly like him. Ethan questioned, "As a child, Mom, is everything okay?" After observing that Sarah's agitated state, Sarah imposed a smile. "Everything is wonderful, sweetie. Let's get inside, and Mark will assist you with your assignment." Ethan went in first, then Mark, who gave homework one final perplexed glance. Sarah stayed behind where Andrew was hiding. "So leave, Andrew." Silently, she murmured, "Please don't come back." I know Sarah was devastated when Andrew emerged from behind the tree. "But you don't know what I've gone through, or what Ethan has endured. I won't allow you to damage it now." Sarah went inside to close. Andrew stood on the pavement, the door solidly in place. Feeling more lost than he had ever been, Sarah leaned inside the house. His son so close yet so far away. Mark came in the hallway, shaking against the closed door. Sarah was worried, so she turned to face Mark, the man who she owed him the truth, which was that she had been her safe haven in recent years. Her voice began to falter as she spoke to Andrew, Ethan's father. Sarah took a big breath, but Mark paled. "It's a lengthy tale that I hoped I would never have to share." In the meantime, Andrew went back to his car in despair, but decided that after making the worst decision of his life 10 years prior, he wanted to figure out how to fix regardless of how unfeasible it appeared. Andrew spent the night in for the first time. He was plagued by unpleasant memories in the motel. Flashbacks invaded his head as he brutally faced his past behavior. 5 years before their separation, Sarah excitedly tells about "That's fantastic, dear Andrew." He adds of the school's promotion chance, is not looking up from his newspaper because he is distracted. But don't get too thrilled since, after all, it's only primary school. Sarah's smile is obvious, and a subsequent flashback. Sarah recommends that they set aside funds so she might pursue a. Andrew, who holds a master's degree, chuckles at the idea that your Andrew believes he will make a lot more money teaching children to color in the present. Guilt-ridden, he wondered how he could have been so blind and sensitive. As Sarah and Mark conversed quietly at the Maple Street residence, "Oh, you think we should tell Ethan Mark in the kitchen after he went to bed?" Sarah asks softly as she rubs her weary hands over her. "I'm not sure if he has the right to know. But what if it causes him pain?" Mark gives Sarah a silent hug before Andrew vanishes once more. Comfort. When Ethan comes downstairs for breakfast the following morning, he discovers Mark by himself and he asks, yawning, "Where's Mom in the kitchen?" "She had to leave early," Mark responds, putting pancakes on his plate while tinkering with his fork. "Mark, you seem thoughtful. May I ask you a question?" "It's about my real dad." Mark, freezing his coffee cup halfway. "Of course, champ. What do you want to know, and why did he say it? Did he not like me?" Mark's heart bleeds when he sees how fragile Ethan is. Phrase. "Hey, that's not at all what it is." Ethan nods partially, but it's complicated and has nothing to do with you. Persuaded outdoors, Andrew tightly holds his heart as he watches the spectacle through the glass. He observes that Mark and Ethan's loving exchange feels like as the youngster walks by, Andrew, an outsider, waits for Ethan to depart for school, carelessly purchases, "Hey youngster, is this ball yours?" Ethan stares as Andrew asks while carrying a soccer ball, "Oh, I assumed it might have fallen from your yard. Are you sure?" "Play occasionally with Mark," Ethan responds, and Andrew relaxes a little. Andrew experiences the sting of "I used to play a lot when I was your." So jealousy is nice, age. They converse for a short while, and Andrew memorizes every second. "I must finally see every detail of his son's face. I'll be late for school, so I'm sure Andrew will answer, 'It was pleasant speaking with you, Ethan, but I'm hesitant to let him go.'" He waves and leaves Andrew far away and the Bourbon mansion, feeling both happy and sad. When Vanessa eventually learns where Andrew is, she employs a private Vanessa, an investigator who rapidly discovers the startling truth, hisses her eyes dangerously, "That clever fool has a son, but he hasn't told me about him." She paces the opulent room. Andrew's unusual behavior and abrupt exit can be explained by her mind racing. She smiles cruelly. "So that's how it will be, sweetie. Wish to exchange your opulent lifestyle for a teacher and a child." Vanessa answers the phone, fingers swiftly dialing. "Hello, Mr. Johnson. I need you to look into this child, Ethan Moore. I want you to understand everything and have the divorce documents ready. It appears like I'll need them." She quickly ends the call with a strategy in mind, assuming Andrew can only abandon her and his affluent lifestyle for a major surprise. Vanessa won't give up without a fight, and she never stops trying to win. Sarah was restless all night. Morning, she was struggling with her thoughts and had heavy circles under her eyes, which she made her deciding that it was time for Ethan to learn the truth. "Ethan, could we after breakfast?" Sarah called while seated on the couch. "Take a deep breath and recall how Ethan nodded when you inquired about your father." Inquisitive. "Well, there's something I must tell you," Sarah said. "Your father, who is in town, is shaking and wants to look into Ethan's eyes." Further on, "What, he's alive?" And Sarah described how after Andrew left them, she discovered that she was pregnant. With every syllable of Ethan's visage changed from surprise to perplexity, and then to rage. "Before he left us," Ethan yelled, "Ethan is getting up and wants to meet me, but I don't want to see him." Please be aware that Sarah attempted to reassure him by explaining what my real father was, as a coward. Sarah sobbed as she slumped into the couch as Ethan rushed to his room and slammed the door. The pain in Ethan's eyes broke her heart, even though she knew it would be difficult. While they were away, Andrew eventually faced Vanessa in her. Vanessa replied icily, "Mansion, why are you here? I assumed you were too preoccupied with Andrew. Your tiny, hidden family was surprised." "How could you, sweet Vanessa?" "I always know everything," so I laughed without humor. "The question is, what are you?" "I can't continue living this way, Vanessa, so I'm here to say it's over." "You think you can just leave me after lying?" Vanessa's face is twisted with rage. Andrew, all I did for you was to be manipulated by you. Considering that you encouraged my desire and caused me to leave Sarah, and you came so voluntarily, Vanessa interrupted sarcastically. Andrew, you chose power and money, so don't be the victim. Only demonstrated Andrew's feelings of humiliation, and she was correct that he had made his own decisions. But I'm making a different decision now, he continued, turning to Vanessa, threatened to reveal all your filth if you left the room. You will lose every underhanded transaction and bribe. Andrew froze everything. Knowing she meant it back at Sarah, was still trembling on the couch when Mark got home from work. What had happened? He inquired. Sarah, who was worried, told Ethan about their talk. Mark gave her a hug, but she could feel his so. Do you believe I answered Sarah's question correctly? Mark was hesitant, I believe. But what is now? Sarah could hear the fear in Mark's voice as Andrew entered our lives. Father Mark is Ethan's voice, but you are the one whose Mark nodded. Yet the atmosphere between them was tense, with Vanessa's threats reverberated in Andrew's mind as he strolled the street that night. Andrew's ears began to mix with flashbacks of his previous behavior. Andrew, disregarding Sarah's aspirations to obtain a master's degree, he came to the insight that his emotional demands were solely focused on making more money. Punch's greed and sexism had stolen from him and ruined his marriage. Spending priceless moments with his son Andrew outside Sarah's home, noticed his son's bedroom light go out so near to Ethan. But I apologize so far, Andrew whispered to the night, for he was aware that he had a long road ahead of him in dealing with Vanessa's corrections, errors, restoring Ethan and Sarah's trust. But for the first time in years, after taking one more glance at the house, Andrew was resolved to act morally regardless of the cost. Andrew turned and proceeded along the dim street, prepared to confront the repercussions of his behavior and struggle for the opportunity to be. Andrew spent a portion of his son's youth wandering the streets of Chicago. His thoughts, guilt dominated his whirlpool of conflicting feelings, yet he was motivated by a desire to connect. With Ethan, he felt like a boat in the middle of a storm as he moved onward. Helpless, and Andrew was aimless one afternoon when he noticed Ethan leaving school, so he went up to him without thinking. Hey Ethan, do you recall me as the guy with the soccer ball? Andrew grinned apprehensively, and Ethan gave him a doubtful glance. Andrew stammered as he realized that I also wanted to check in on you late. How odd he must have appeared. But I'm all right, Ethan said, gesturing, swiftly leaving. Andrew stood there feeling completely later, as a fool. He sobbed in his hotel room for the first time in years at the truth of his inability to be a good father, striking him with all of his might while Sarah looked on, seeing Andrew's clumsy attempts. The party wanted to yell at him to keep away in order to keep Ethan safe, all expenses, but a different portion that she hardly recognized and felt sorry for. Andrew is attempting to contact you, Sarah informed Ethan one evening. Scowled, wondering why he didn't care before Sarah's side. Ethan's voice stated, Dear, sometimes very big ones, he hurt you. With a mixture of anguish and rage, Sarah gave her son a painful hug for the suffering she witnessed in his eyes. Mark, who was aware of the change in the atmosphere, he decided to take Sarah out for a romantic meal one starry night, saying, Sarah, I'm kneeling. And Sarah was stunned and had tears in her eyes as she presented a ring and asked, Will you marry me? She adored Mark because he was steady and trustworthy. But the proposal among all the she was caught off guard by emotional turmoil. I need to consider it, said, observing Mark's dissatisfaction. A few days later, Ethan was riding his bike along the street when a car sped up, and he watched from a distance. He shoved Ethan aside without thinking, and they both fell onto the. Andrew asked his heart, Grass, are you okay? While rushing, Ethan was shocked but unscathed. He bowed and said, Thank you, as he looked at Andrew, wanted to give Ethan a hug out of curiosity and dread. Inform him that he was his father, and although he loved him, he refrained from lending a hand. The boy, who stood up silently, was far distant from Vanessa. She engaged investigators to delve deeper into Andrew's background as part of her strategy, aiming to discover everything about his business and find something she might use against him. Transactions over the previous 10 years, she placed phone orders for every amount, despite Andrew's ignorance of Vanessa's cunning. I want to ruin him. He glanced at his pricey suits during restless evenings, wondering about every choice that had led him to this place. One evening, while strolling around the expensive timepieces, he felt dissatisfied with himself when Andrew paused in front of a toy store in the city. He noticed tears filled his eyes when he saw a wooden train similar to the one he had as a boy. When Andrew considered all of Ethan's birthdays that he had missed, he made a choice. Even if Sarah and Ethan would never change the past, he could fight for a brighter future, completely forgiven him. He would make every effort to attend his son's. Andrew returned to his hotel with a newfound sense of resolve, picked up the phone, and prepared to make the decision that could alter everything. It's time to settle accounts, Andrew, and I need your assistance with certain legal matters. As night settled over Chicago, Andrew felt as though he was in the spotlight. Despite the fact that the worst was still to come, he was finally. The truth is like a ticking time bomb, and he is prepared to face the repercussions of his actions at any cost. Ethan was returning from a walk on a Sunday afternoon when everything finally exploded. When I noticed Andrew and Sarah conversing on the porch in the park, everything immediately made sense. The stranger who rescued him from the collision was the man with the soccer ball. Father, is it him? Ethan shouted as he ran in their direction. It's my dad, Sarah, Andrew, and Ethan were caught off guard and frozen. Describe how Sarah began, but Ethan was already crying. Why did you lie? Why did you let him approach? He yelled in infuriation and bewilderment. That Andrew's voice came forward. Ethan, it's my fault. Your mother was merely attempting to keep you safe. Ethan glanced at Andrew's eyes full of sadness. Why have you left us and returned now? Hours passed throughout the confrontation, with Ethan alternating between sobbing and fury. Andrew confronting the hard realities of his circumstances, while Sarah attempting to diffuse the tension past deeds. Andrew made the hardest choice of his life in his office. His hands were shaking as he picked up the phone. Mr. I'm Andrew Thompson, and I must admit to certain unethical business activities that I've carried out over the last few years. Andrew was aware that this would spell the end of his wealth, probably even prison, but the burden of these secrets became too much for him to bear. So Mark came to Sarah's house, seeing Andrew in the midst of the chaos. His face darkened. What's happening here? Asking in a voice that made Sarah feel both physically and emotionally anxious. Weary, pushed Mark away and said, I can't marry you. Before she could think, Mark spoke, and he flinched as though smacked. Is it his fault? Mark pointed at Sarah, gave an honest response. Andrew, and it's for me, for I can't bring you into this, Ethan. We need to work through our history. Sarah was devastated by Mark's mess, which left her confused and hurt, but oddly thankfully, Andrew's world absolutely collapsed the following morning, with headlines screaming business. The magnate admits to defrauding Vanessa, who is incensed at Andrew's confession, had given the press reporters around Sarah's home whatever detail she could gather. Following inquiries concerning Andrew and Ethan, Sarah was appalled and attempted to defend herself. Why are they here? Inquired Ethan from the chaos mom. Dear Sarah, I'm afraid it's complicated, she said, closing the curtains, but it will get past Andrew's hotel siege, seen his life unravel, his assets frozen, his business partners deserting him, and the desperate. He called Sarah because the prospect of going to prison became very serious. Soon as she responded, he apologized, saying he didn't want this to have an impact on I know Andrew. Sarah, but what are we going to do? Andrew closed his eyes and said, I'll fix this. He was overcome with guilt. Sarah managed to sit with Ethan that evening as the street was illuminated by camera flashes in his room. Ethan, I understand that this is difficult, but your father is attempting to. Ethan was silent for a minute, which was the correct thing to do. Sarah felt her heart tighten as she was being sent to prison. I'm not sure why, sweetie, but whatever, will remain together no matter what. But in the meantime, Andrew had to confront the very real loss of everything. Yet for the first time in a long time, he felt although the truth came at a heavy cost. He was prepared to pay it for opportunity to spend time with his son while he is by himself in his hotel room. It was time to confront the repercussions of Andrew picking up the phone once more. Hi, this is Andrew. His deeds, no matter how painful. Thompson, the sun had just risen, and I was prepared to turn myself into the police. Sarah's heart stopped when she went into Ethan's room to get him up when she noticed the crumpled letter on the nightstand said, I need to think, don't look for me. And there was an empty bed with the window open. Sarah called Andrew in a panic and yelled, Ethan has fled. Andrew felt the world spin as soon as he replied, I'm on my way now. Andrew hurried to the door and discovered Sarah sobbing on the porch. They temporarily forgot everything that had happened to them. united by their concern for their Andrew, pledged to hold Sarah's son. And we will find him, Hans. They started searching every park and street for Ethan used to visit, and as time went on, their fear increased. What if something were to happen to him? Sarah whispered. Andrew swallowed hard as he trembled. But we can't lose. As they looked, memories of the past came flooding back to them. Sarah recalled Andrew playing. Before everything collapsed, Andrew relived the moment he shared with tiny Ethan in the garden. For the first time, Ethan experienced love in the hospital and the worries that made him run away when Mark started to look breathless in the late afternoon. I arrived right away. When I heard him ask how I could help Sarah, she looked at him in shock. And thank you, she said softly. Despite everything, Mark still cared, touching his arm. The three parted ways, traversing an additional area before the end arrived, cold and threatening to deepen everyone's sadness. But Andrew was the one who eventually discovered a clue. He noticed alone at the old park where he used to take Sarah years ago. Ethan called gently from a man perched on a swing. The youngster approached, his eyes red with tears, and he questioned, "Why did you come back?" Andrew said, "On the swing," but his voice was choking. His heart was heavy beside him. Since I had made the worst decision of my life, since Ethan remained silent for a while, I've been regretting my decision to leave every day to herd. Mom, you left us. I know. Andrew's response was tearful eyes, and while I can't alter it, I'm here now attempting to. I want you to know that I love you, even if you never forgive me. Make things right. Sarah and Mark are constantly with me while I'm with Ethan. Ethan, Sarah yelled as she ran there, holding her son. Vanessa's sudden and forceful entrance disrupted the scene. Therefore, this is, you throw away everything we built for this, she said at Andrew. Andrew got up and positioned himself between Vanessa and his pitiful little family. Vanessa smiled and said, "Family enough, it's over." Sadly, Andrew, you're going to lose everything, even your riches. Freedom for Andrew, who glanced at Sarah and Ethan before turning back to Vanessa, for example, cannot purchase family. Love. Vanessa was enraged. But Mark stopped and held her. "Seeing that you were outnumbered," he said forcefully, "I think you better leave." After giving a final disdainful glance, Vanessa departed, leaving a tense silence. "I apologize," Andrew muttered in a voice that was laden as he turned to face Sarah, Ethan, and Mark behind him. "Great passion for everything related to my previous actions. I shall now transform myself into the person responsible for the turmoil I have caused in your lives. You won't have to worry about me anymore, authorities, since Ethan will surprise everyone tomorrow." Andrew nodded and went forward, saying, "You're going to prison. Unfortunately, it's likely that Ethan and I made mistakes." Ethan glanced at Sarah before turning back to, "But what if I wanted to learn more about you, Andrew?" Andrew's heart grew with, "Though I understand if you don't. I would really enjoy that." "You can choose, sweetie, and we'll be together." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, held Ethan. "Here for you regardless of what you choose to do." At that precise instant, beneath the stars of a devastated family started to gradually give up in the ancient park. But it wouldn't be simple because there was a lot to make amends. But for the first time in years, Andrew, Sarah, and Ethan hugged each other with tears of grief and hope. Above all, love. Mark observed with a sorrowful grin on his lips from a distance. Knowing even if the future was uncertain, he had made the correct decision that evening. The sound of the judge's gavel was sufficient for the moment, since they were together, reverberated over the courtroom, concluding Andrew's conviction for financial fraud. He received a 2-year prison sentence and was mandated to refund all of his illicitly obtained. Rich Andrew agreed to the decision with a CM who shocked everyone by saying it was a reasonable cost for. In the months that followed, Andrew utilized his incarceration to think back on his errors and make plans, his future. He enrolled in classes on business ethics and started formulating concepts to. After being freed, Sarah kept her promise. When Ethan first visited Andrew in prison, it was tense and uneasy. But with time, father and son genuinely got to know one another. Andrew would ask sincere questions if he was in school this week. First hesitant, Ethan became curious and opened up. "I had math test, and I believe I performed well." Andrew grinned. "You're quite intelligent, so I'm sure you were proud." As the discussions progressed, Ethan posed challenging queries regarding the past, and Andrew gave an honest response. Despite how unpleasant it can be, Sarah observed the evolution of this connection with a mixture of anxiety and concern and hope that she kept boundaries clear so Andrew knew his part in. During one visit, Sarah informed Andrew that Ethan needed you as a father, but Andrew nodded in respect for Sarah, saying he couldn't risk hurting him again. I respect that choice, and I will do everything in my power to be Ethan's father to merits. But in the meantime, Sarah and Mark's lives went on beyond the prison walls. After some introspection and open discussions, they agreed to give their relationship another go. By accident, Sarah was gorgeous as she walked down the aisle on a bright spring day. Mark waited for her in a simple outfit, his eyes gleaming with love. Ethan proudly carried the rings. Andrew, who is still incarcerated, was informed with conflicting, though he felt a little melancholy. He was primarily relieved to know Sarah, and when Andrew was eventually freed, Ethan had discovered security and love, was resolved to use his business expertise to restore his life in an honest manner, began collaborating with an NGO that provided small businesses with free consulting. One of their weekly meetings, he told Ethan, "As an entrepreneur, I want to use my skills for good now." Ethan, aged 12, gazed at his father in the park with fresh. The word "Dad" still made Andrew's head turn. "And that's awesome." Sarah watched the new family every day, and he was determined to acquire the title of Heart Jump. In a cautious manner, she and Mark gave Ethan a secure, caring environment, while Andrew, a year following his discharge, Andrew made an effort to be a responsible father. Stood next to Sarah and Mark during Ethan's school science fair, felt a rush of appreciation for playing a role in his son's life, even though it was different from his own. Andrew told Ethan, "I'm proud of you, son." Following his presentation, Ethan grinned and embraced Andrew, followed by Sarah and Mark. The unusual family came together in a scene that few could have predicted months ago. Later that evening, Andrew thought back on their love for Ethan. He reflected on his previous chauvinistic actions and how he valued now that he knew how mistaken he was about Sarah and her ambitions. When Sarah arrived, Andrew remarked, "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Gather, Ethan." Sarah nodded, her eyes softening. "You're trying." As he saw Sarah and Ethan go, Ethan realized that we all do. In his years of affluence, Andrew had never had such a sense of peace and power. He had lost a lot of money, but he had gotten the opportunity, which was considerably more significant. The path to being a better man and a decent father was yet long. There was still a lot to learn and fix, but Andrew was committed to proceed day by day, constantly aiming to be the greatest version of Under the Chicago Skies. That evening, Andrew silently pledged to Sarah, Ethan, and everyone else he had hurt. He would live. The least he could do was to live the remainder of his days with integrity, compassion, and love, the second opportunity life had given him. Thus he was filled with hope, and Andrew approached his small flat with resolve in his eyes, prepared to take on whatever the future held. Although his path of redemption was far from complete, he was finally on the right track. I hope you liked the narrative today. Please remember to like the video, and in order to avoid missing any of our heartwarming tales, please subscribe to the channel and tell your friends about it to be moved as well. And please share your thoughts in the comments section, your thoughts and recommendations to keep producing heartfelt material.